Welcome to Season 4 of My Wife the Dietitian, a fun, evidence-based weekly podcast about nutrition and healthy living. On today's show, we're talking about healthy habits, how to form them, and how to keep them. Stay with us to hear all the details. Enjoying the show? You can help others find it and enjoy it too by giving us a 5-star rating or review. If you feel like reaching out to us with a question or comment, you can send us an email at mywifetherd@gmail.com. And don't forget to visit our website at mywifethedietitian.com, as well as our social media pages. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Enjoy the show. Welcome to My Wife the Dietitian. Hello, Sandra.
Hi, Rob.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. Been helping people a lot with trying to maintain their progress. And we talk about habits. And I've been reading a lot about different habits. So the book, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, and Atomic Habits by James Clear. Have you heard of those ones?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about those. But yeah, humans are a collection of their daily habits. So this basically affects their health and long-term risk of disease.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing with anything in your life is developing the habit so it becomes routine.
Yeah.
You know, like exercise, eating, you know, brushing your teeth every night. Everything is something we have to train our brain essentially to get in the habit of doing.
Yeah, but
and it's tricky.
It totally is.
Right.
And do you remember you did sociology in university? So stages of change, that model, and the whole idea of there's pre-contemplation. So someone doesn't even realize there's a problem, or they're unaware of the problem and they're really not thinking of change because no problem.
Right.
Then contemplation is the next stage. And that's when you start to become aware of the problem, and then you're starting to just think about change.
Like, my teeth feel really fuzzy. Maybe I should brush them. Like that stage, right?
Maybe.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
It's a practical example.
Sure.
For sure. And then there's the preparation stage where it's like you're starting to be more committed to the idea of change. And that's actually a key point in helping people with their desire to have new habits.
Right.
And then there's the action phase. So that's when you're actively modifying your behaviors and you're trying to change your experiences or environment, and you're looking at your triggers that, you know, trigger your cravings or trigger the behavior that you want to change.
So you're actually doing the action.
The action.
Whatever that is, brushing your teeth, or you're exercising, or you're eating different foods, or
Exactly.
But it hasn't become habit yet.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And that's the thing. Remember we did an episode on SMART goals?
Yeah, that was a good one.
That was really good. Episode 53.
It was a New Year's Day episode, I think, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which is perfect because a lot of people have New Year's resolutions.
Exactly.
And they start to think about, okay, what do I want to change? Do I want to lose weight? And then they kind of, by, you know, mid to late February, it's kind of gone out the window because maybe they weren't actually committed to the change.
Right, exactly.
So the SMART goals actually fit into because they're planning and the execution phase, they fit into the preparation and action area of the stage of change.
Okay.
So they don't really, if someone's not aware of the problem, so the pre-contemplation, they don't think they need to change anything. Right. And, you know, we see people all the time in that phase because, you know, a lot of times someone has had a medical event or had to go to the hospital, and maybe they've had a heart attack, or they've had something that's kind of like
eye-opening, life-changer.
Totally,
yeah.
Exactly. And then
wake-up call.
Exactly. That's when they kind of quickly jump over, like they're in the pre-contemplation, and then they jump right into the action almost.
You probably see those people a lot just with the kind of work you do, right?
I have.
People come in and go, oh my God, I need to change my diet like today.
Yeah.
I don't want to die.
Right. Yeah.
Right? I mean, yeah.
But then it's not that easy because it's, as I said, people are a collection of their daily habits. So, sometimes that's when we see like someone doing like the 180, turn, like they just want to change everything overnight, which isn't necessarily sustainable because the power of your environment and your daily habits can start to creep back up.
True. Some people can do it, but it's tricky.
Yeah. And I love with James Clear, the Atomic Habits, he talks about the 1% more. So the small, consistent improvements each day. So that is really important, that change takes time and it's not an overnight thing. It's a journey. And I like to talk to my clients about that because I think a lot of people want to see instant results, or they want to lose 20 pounds in a month, or, something like that. And it's like, well, okay, let's like rein that in.
Yeah.
And let's talk about this.
It's a marathon. I mean, you can't focus on the finish line with something like this. You just have to focus around like the next 100 feet kind of thing, like one step at a time, and trust that will get you across the finish line.
Yeah.
But if you're constantly focusing on your goal and every day you're like, oh, I'm not there, then you're discouraging yourself and you're preventing yourself from actually making any progress.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does take at least 2.5 weeks to almost 9 months to form a new habit, depending on the complexity of the habit, depending on, how consistent you are, your environment, your triggers, like all of those things you are taken into consideration. I have a really interesting case study, or not case study. It's in the Power of Habit book by Charles Duhigg. And basically on the front cover, it says, Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business. So on page 141, this is a bit of a story. It's really interesting.
Okay.
In 1992, a British psychologist walked into 2 of Scotland's busiest orthopedic hospitals and recruited 6 patients for an experiment she hoped would explain how to boost the willpower of people exceptionally resistant to change. The patients on average were 68 years old. Most of them earned less than $10,000 a year and didn't have more than a high school degree. All of them had recently undergone hip or knee replacement surgeries. But because they were relatively poor and uneducated, many had waited years for their operations. They were retirees, elderly mechanics, and store clerks. They were in life's final chapters, and most had no desire to pick up a new book. Recovering from a hip and knee surgery is incredibly arduous. The operation involves severing joint muscles and sawing through bones. While recovering, the smallest movements, shifting in bed or flexing a joint, can be excruciating. However, it's essential that patients begin exercising almost as soon as they wake from surgery. They must begin moving their legs and hips before the muscles and skin have healed, or scar tissue will clog the joint, destroying its flexibility. In addition, if patients don't start exercising, they risk developing blood clots. But the agony is so extreme that it's not unusual for people to skip out on a rehab session. Patients, particularly elderly ones, often refuse to comply with the doctor's orders. The Scottish study participants were the types of people most likely to fail at rehabilitation. The scientists conducting the experiment wanted to see if it was possible to help them harness their willpower. She gave each patient a booklet after their surgeries that detailed their rehab schedule, and in the back were 13 additional pages, 1 for each week, with blank spaces and instructions. In quotes, my goals for this week are, and then blank. Write down exactly what you are going to do. For example, if you're going to go for a walk this week, write down where and when you're going to walk. Do you remember we did this with the SMART goals? Exactly, like, specific, measurable, action, realistic, and time sensitive.
That's what SMART stands for.
Exactly.
Right, okay.
And that's for the action phase of when you're changing, changing your behavior. So she asked patients to fill in each of these pages with specific plans. Then she compared the recoveries of those who wrote out goals with those of patients who had received the same booklets but didn't write anything. Can you see where this is going?
I can guess. Absolutely. Yeah.
It seems absurd to think that giving people a few pieces of blank paper might make a difference in how quickly they recover from surgery. But when the researchers visited the patients 3 months later, she found a striking difference between the two groups. The patients who had written plans in their booklet had started walking almost twice as fast as the ones who had not. They had started getting in and out of their chairs, unassisted, almost 3 times as fast. They were putting on their shoes, doing the laundry, and making themselves meals quicker than the patients who hadn't scribbled out goals ahead of time.
Wow.
The psychologist wanted to understand why. She examined the booklets and discovered that most of the blank pages had been filled in with specific, detailed plans about the most mundane aspects of recovery. One patient, for example, had written, "I will walk to the bus stop tomorrow to meet my wife from work," and then noted what time he would leave, the route he would walk, and what he would wear, which coat he would bring if it was raining, and what pills he would take if the pain became too much. Another patient in a similar study wrote a series of very specific schedules regarding the exercises he would do each time he went to the bathroom. A third wrote a minute-by-minute itinerary for walking around the block. As the psychologist scrutinized the booklet, she saw that many of the plans had something in common. They focused on how patients would handle a specific moment of anticipated pain. The man who exercised on the way to the bathroom, for instance, knew that each time he stood up from the couch, the ache was excruciating. So he wrote out a plan for dealing with it. Automatically take the first step right away so he wouldn't be tempted to sit down again. The patient who met his wife at the bus stop dreaded the afternoons because the stroll was the longest and most painful each day. So he detailed every obstacle he might confront and came up with a solution ahead of time. Put another way, the patient's plans were built around inflection points where they knew their pain, and thus the temptation to quit would be strongest. The patients were telling themselves how they were going to make it over the hump. Is that cool or what?
Wow, that's amazing.
Isn't that just incredible? Because change can be so overwhelming. And for these patients, I mean, if they don't get up and walk, it's their demise. They know it. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, that's a pretty huge motivator.
It is.
Right?
So they pushed through the pain. They had a detailed plan. And this is so interesting. I've been reading The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday.
Mm-hmm.
The Ancient Art of Turning Adversity to Advantage. So it's like the Stoic kind of theory and method. And it reminds me, I mean, they're inflection points. These patients that were trying to recover, they knew that it was key for them to push through the pain if they wanted to get better. And they needed to form new habits if they wanted to live, basically. There's a good quote in this book, in The Obstacle is the Way, page 49, think differently. So F. Scott Fitzgerald, genius is the ability to put into effect what is in your mind. There's no other definition for it. So it's turning something into your mind, your plan, your idea, actually into action.
Mm-hmm.
And and so, it's amazing. Taking action and sticking with it can be so important for improving your health over time.
It's huge.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's totally huge.
Yeah.
I know for myself, anytime in my life I've tried to make changes, I make a list. It's kind of the same concept as the patients with their little notes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't make, I don't know, I'm fairly detailed with my kind of daily to-do list, but often I'll have an end goal, and every day I'm chipping away at it, moving myself closer to that end goal. So it might be like, I don't know, whatever the next step is kind of thing. That's what my week will look like. And I actually changed how I make my lists. I make a list now on my phone where I can put a check mark beside it when I've accomplished that task throughout the day. And then by the end of the day, I'll have a list of checked off items, and it's like, wow, that felt, it feels good. You feel like you're making progress.
Yeah,
and
that is so key. Is the
huge.
celebration of your progress.
Yeah. Another way to do it is to make a list of the things you've done instead of like, I used to have my list on my phone, and when I did it, I would delete it. Yes. And then I'd get to the end of the day and there'd be nothing there, and I'm like, oh, it didn't feel the same because I didn't get to celebrate anything.
Exactly.
It felt good when I deleted it.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, I didn't have this collection of things that I had done. And it's nice to, look at it. Some days my list is like 10 or 12 things long, and I'm like, wow, yeah, I did a lot of stuff today. And each one of those things is moving me towards, a different goal. It might be a health goal. It might be a work-related goal or a family-related goal, or, something like a hobby or something I'm working on, or it might be just cutting the grass, like those are all things that I need to do in my life. Yes. In order to improve one element of my life, right? Uh-huh. So they're all important in their own regard. Yes. Yeah. And there's a good quote from Getting Things Done by David Allen. You remember that book? Well, I didn't read the book. I read some of it. Yeah. And that's where I got the idea of, like, what's the next task? What's the next action? Right. Next action is his concept, right? Mm-hmm. And I love that, because it's like we were saying in the beginning, it's like you can't focus on the goal. You have to focus on just what's the next action that's going to get you to the goal. And that's kind of, I've adopted that kind of, ideology into my lists. It's like my goal is let's say my goal is to run a marathon. Uh-huh. I'm not going to go out and run a marathon tomorrow. So the next action is I need to walk around the block. And then the next day, maybe I'm going to walk and run. Right. And then the next day, maybe I'm going to run around the block, and then I'm going to make it longer. And then the next day I'm going to make it longer. Those are the actions you have to take. And then 3 months from now, or 2 months, or however long it takes me to get there, then I can run a marathon. Yeah. Which is the original goal, but you're not going to go out and do it on day one. Exactly. It has to be broken into steps, and then celebrate the success of the step. Exactly. Yeah. So Julia Louise Woodruff says, I thought you were going to say Dreyfus. No. Elaine. Sorry, carry on. That's okay. Out of the strain of the doing into the peace of the done. So the work of the doing is the hard work, and then it's the peace of the done. Yeah, it's celebrating, right? It's celebrating the done. So like you said, you check off your marks and say, okay, done. It feels good. It does feel good. And it's really important to recognize that, because I think as humans, we're always looking, it's like the gap and the gain. That's another book that's really awesome. We're always looking at the gap. We're always looking at what we need to do next. And we forget about celebrating what we've done. Exactly. And reflecting, and actually, because that helps propel you to have the confidence and the awareness that you're able to do it. You're not a failure. And, I think that's so hard. I've seen so many clients where they've worked so hard and they've done a lot of good work, and, no more indigestion, no more heartburn, bowels are working great, but they still want to lose weight. And they forget to appreciate that they've actually come a long way. Mm-hmm. And now is the next phase. So, keeping those habits going and celebrating that. And then you get into the maintenance phase. So the maintenance is the after the action phase of the stages of change. So pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, and relapse. So the maintenance is a really important phase, because that's the trying to maintain those new habits. That's a tricky one for a lot of people. It really is. Yeah, it really is. Well, I think establishing the Like, what was the one stage where you said, like, you're doing the action, like you're doing it every day, but it's hard to get that to take hold.
Yes.
And then to maintain it. It's like the New Year's Day. I'm going to go to the gym every day. I'm going to start working out. And you do it, right? You're doing the action for 3-4 weeks, whatever it is. And then it starts to be, once a week. And then it starts to be, a couple times a month. And then it's like, no, I don't have time for it anymore. And it just kind of
fizzles out.
Exactly.
That's right.
So getting it to take hold is probably the most challenging, and then maintaining it is probably a close second.
Yeah. And one thing that David Allen in the Getting Things Done said, the sense of anxiety and guilt doesn't come from having too much to do. It's the automatic result of breaking agreements that you made with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So that's where it comes from. It's more like, when people say, I'm way too busy, or I can't do this, and, I have too much to do. It's because you've made some commitments in your mind at some point, and you wanted to stick with those new habits, and you weren't able to do it. So it's kind of like when we look at the SMART goals, and when we're actually the actionable. So like the specific, measurable, action, realistic, and time sensitive. So we want it to be realistic. The action has to be realistic. Mm-hmm. So we can't put our expectation too high, like 20 pounds in a month. Let's tone that down. Let's say 1 pound a week. Let's just like go in the right direction.
Right.
And like what I said about with James Clear's idea with 1% better. So right. 1%, that's nothing. Like you can get better just 1% a day, so that's all you need. So just starting small, be consistent, and repeat over time. So this doesn't put the expectation too high, and it's doable. So then you have those small wins.
Exactly. It's like putting pennies in a jar,
mm-hmm.
right? You don't think about it at the time. It doesn't seem like much, but at the end of like a year, you're like, oh my God, that jar is like, well, if it's full of pennies, it's not going to be worth a lot. But let's say it's $1 that you're putting in the jar every day.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be a chunk of money that didn't really, you didn't feel it as you're making that donation, we'll call it.
Exactly. Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, the consistency is really important. The regular daily repetition to be done automatic, right? And then the context is important. So you want to try to have consistency in terms of your environment and, same time, same place.
Yep.
That helps a lot too. So yoga, for instance, like waking up and doing yoga every morning. That's something I started 2.5 years ago, and I do it every morning. Even like if we're not at home, if I don't do it, I feel really stiff through the day. Mm-hmm. So it's just something to get my body moving. But, it wasn't always like that. Like I had to actually, be consistent and try to do it most days and just kind of do it in the same spot with the same tools. Like,
consistency.
Consistency.
With all things involved.
Exactly. And you got to think of your motivation. Like, what's your why? Like, why do you want to change? Like, why do you want to do this? Like for those people in the rehab hospital, well, what's their reason?
Well, they want to be able to move.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty huge motivation.
They want to stay independent.
Yeah.
They want to be able to get out of a chair without help. They want to live on their own independently with their spouse. They don't want to have to go to, a care home and have people look after them. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge motivation. That's a huge why.
Yeah, it really is. I've got out of the habit of doing yoga. I used to do it regularly for years, every morning. And I've kind of gotten out of that habit, and I want to get back into it, but I find it challenging, and I don't think I understand the why. And I think that's what's holding me back, because I get up and I want to do it, but I just kind of don't. I get into other things that I have to do in the morning, and the yoga kind of like gets kicked to the side. And yeah, that's a bit of a challenge for me right now, trying to get back in the habit of doing that. Because the days that I do it, it feels great. And it only takes, 10 or 15 minutes. It's not a huge time commitment, but it's just wrapping my head around making it a daily commitment. That's I'm finding challenging. But it's funny, it's every time we talk about goals, it comes down to me running a marathon or doing yoga. It seems those are the two things we often consistently talk about me struggling with. Not that I want to run a marathon. That's just a arbitrary type of example. But the yoga, yeah, that's something I seem to be. Like, if you listen to the SMART goals, I think that's the goal we use as an example.
Episode 53.
Which was like 3 years ago. Rob wants to do yoga every morning. How are we going to make that happen?
Maybe you weren't actually, you weren't.
I don't know.
In the preparation phase.
Things. Yeah, I don't know. Like, my morning routine changes over time, and I think that's just, your things fluctuate in your life, and that's just got bumped in the process. So I got to figure out how to bump it back into place.
Okay. Well, here's a quote in the obstacle is the way for action. What is action? Action is commonplace. Right action is not. As a discipline, it's not any kind of action that will do, but directed action. Everything must be done in the service of the whole, step by step, action by action. So this is part of it, right? We'll looking at the obstacles in front of us. So looking at, what is the obstacle? What's the inflection point, and plan around that.
Okay.
So, and I think part of that is, when I talk to people about, changing their habits with eating and helping them with change in terms of their overall intake, we look at the triggers in their life. Like, okay, like there's
like food. What are the potential things that are going to cause them problems?
Exactly.
Oh, great idea.
Yeah, like food is always within reach. So if you have on the counter candies and chocolate chip cookies and, things within view, or at a workplace where there's always donuts on the counter, that is, you got to plan around that, because that's going to be an inflection point, a pain point.
Right.
Also, when you go to a restaurant, and we know that restaurant portion sizes are always bigger than what we really need to eat. And just knowing that, whatever you order, you're probably going to be satisfied. If you leave that restaurant, whatever, even if you ordered half a portion, you'd probably be satisfied.
Yeah.
So just like thinking of like, okay, we're going to a restaurant, and I want to like maintain my progress with my healthy eating, but I do want to celebrate with my family. I want to be social, but you don't have to get like a lot of food. You don't have to eat the bread before and the,
the whole, you don't need the mega burger.
Yeah. Just know going out that it's going to be good value, and people love value for their money. So all these things are really important to just consider before going. So just kind of having a plan and be prepared for what your action will be there. It's really important that to realize that it's not just about what you know and what to do. It's about actually changing behavior. And we did an episode with Tony Toledo, dietitian from the Path Pod. So she's got the positive approaches to health and, all about behavior change. So that's a really good one. We'll put that in the show notes. We also have one with Wendy Shaw, a dietitian, Craving Change, episode 74. So that's another one where I get some of these ideas for like the triggers that we have in our environment and how to plan around those things we know that are going to cause a problem. And then, we get in the whole cycle of eating and repenting and feeling guilty and then feeling bad and then doing it again. We just want to help in the positive, in the positive path, and 1% improvement over the over the week. And also Dr. Wesley McCormick, we did Food is Medicine, and we talked a lot about behavior change with him. Mm-hmm. That was a really good one too, dietitian who does culinary medicine. So we'll put those in the show notes. And basically, bottom line is just if you're ready for change and you are thinking of a specific goal, then be gentle with yourself, be flexible in your plan, and celebrate your wins when you do something like things are working.
Daily. Celebrate daily.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the motivator that keeps you moving forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it makes a difference. Just like that case study that Sandra read about, you can see what a difference it makes just having those little things you can check off every day, and that's what motivates you to keep getting up the next day and doing it again. So
yeah, or even like write it on a sticky note, whatever specific action you want to do. Just like those people, the patients, they wrote in their blank pages, and it actually helped them to move along for their goal.
Exactly. So yeah, like Sandra said, we will include everything we discussed today in the show notes as far as the references and the episodes we mentioned. They're really good episodes with a lot of really valuable information. So be sure to check those out if you're looking at making some changes in your life. We all are. We're trying to change something somewhere along the way. So it's good to have some healthy habits and some good ideas of how to do that. For more information on what we're doing and other healthy ideas and tips, check out our website. We've got all sorts of great information there. We've got an amazing blog. We've got a weekly newsletter you can subscribe to. It's all available through the website if you want to go there. It's mywifethedietitian.com. You can also send us your questions if you have something you are dying to know about or you need some help with. We are more than happy to answer your question on the show here. So just send us your questions.
We love to hear from the listeners. We love to hear some questions you have and love answering them because it really it helps frame our podcast and the episodes that we're doing. So we want to address what you're interested in and what you have questions around. So fire away.
Exactly. It's mywifetherd@gmail.com. That's our email. You can also find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to us there as well, or at least give us a like. That's super helpful. Something else that's helpful is rating and reviewing. That helps us. It also helps other people find a good show. If they read your review or your rating, it might encourage them to check things out here. You can also share with a friend. That's also helpful. Helps us get more people on board here and helps your friend out with a great new show. So don't be shy. Let your friends know what you think of My Wife, the Dietitian. And that is it for this episode. We'll be back on Wednesday with Nutrition Nuggets. So until then, have a fantastic week, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on My Wife, the Dietitian. If you like what you heard, don't be shy. Leave us a comment or review, and be sure to share our podcast with your friends. If you'd like to hear more, hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on our social media pages for updates, episode trailers, and other odds and ends. For more info and links on what we discussed on today's episode, check the show notes. We'll be back next week with another informative and fun-filled episode.